They called her the Princess of the Clouds. Perfect. Beautiful. But broken. For 10 years, she never touched the ground. Her father, the Emperor, said she was fragile. But a boy from the slums didn't see a broken doll. He saw a puzzle waiting to be solved. He didn't have magic. He didn't have money. He only had a pile of scrap metal, and a crazy promise. This is the story of how a heap of rust gave a princess her wings. Chapter 1. The Sky and the Mire. The floating city of Aethelgard hung suspended amidst the clouds, like a colossal jewel carved from crystal and white steel. The light from millions of plasma lamps radiated a brilliant halo, pushing back the darkness of the night sky, refusing to let even a shadow intrude upon its perfection. Up there, the air was always scrubbed clean, carrying the faint, artificial scent of lavender, while symphonies echoed softly from speakers hidden within marble statues. It was paradise. But every paradise cast a shadow. Deep beneath the belly of that jewel, separated by 10,000 meters of empty air, where the sun rarely touched, lay the lower level. The locals had a more honest name for it: the Mire. Kaelen wiped the back of his grease-stained hand across his forehead, leaving a long streak of black oil on his sun-darkened skin. The rhythmic clang of his hammer against metal rang out in the cramped, humid space of his workshop, harmonizing with the howling wind that whistled through the rusted gaps in the walls. He squinted, focusing on a tiny energy core pulsing with a weak blue light on his workbench. "Come on now. Don't die on me," Kaelen whispered, his voice raspy from the industrial smog but gentle, as if he were coaxing a frightened animal. With the precision of a surgeon, he used his tweezers to pinch a filament as thin as a spider's web, bridging it to the main circuit. A spark hissed, flaring bright orange. On the table, the mechanical bird shuddered. Its wings, grafted from flattened soda cans and copper wire, vibrated once, twice, and then beat furiously. Whir! It lifted off, wobbling drunkenly in the air before stabilizing and circling the room that smelled of old oil and ozone. Kaelen smiled. It was a genuine smile that cracked the grime on his face. But the smile faded the moment his amber eyes landed on a torn holographic poster flickering on the wall. The Starlight Gala, celebrating 100 years of the Aethelgard's ascension. He needed a military-grade gravity stabilizer. It was the only component missing to finish his life's work, a massive filtration system that could scrub the toxic air of the Mire so the children down here would stop coughing up blood. And that specific part, tonight, was being displayed as a meaningless luxury centerpiece at the gala upstairs. "Sorry, little guy. I've got a long climb ahead," Kaelen muttered to the bird as it landed on his shoulder. He knelt and pulled an old wooden chest from under his cot. Inside lay his disguise, a waiter's vest he had scavenged from a trash chute 3 years ago, stitched and patched so meticulously that the seams were almost invisible. The journey from the Mire to the upper realm was a climb through hell to reach heaven. Kaelen spent 2 hours clinging to the freezing undercarriage of a food waste transport shuttle, teeth chattering as the temperature dropped with the altitude. When the shuttle docked at the service port of the Cloud Palace, Kaelen dropped silently, rolling into a camera blind spot. He dusted off the frost on his shoulders, straightened his collar, and took a deep breath. The air here was too sweet. It was so clean it actually made his lungs ache. He slipped into the stream of servers carrying trays of crystal champagne flutes. He kept his head down, moving with the practiced invisibility of the lower class. That was the first rule of survival: the rich never look at the faces of those who serve them. To them, he was just a pair of floating hands holding a tray. The grand ballroom was overwhelming. The ceiling was a massive glass dome, displaying the entire Milky Way galaxy in high definition. Men in tailcoats studded with diamonds and women in gowns that billowed like smoke laughed, clinked glasses, and spun in an endless waltz. Kaelen wove through the crowd, his sharp eyes scanning for the tech exhibit. but security was tight. Sleek, white droid guards with glowing red visors stood at every major doorway. Damn it, he cursed under his breath. He needed a side entrance. He spotted a heavy glass door slightly ajar, leading to the west balcony. The hanging gardens. It was usually empty because the high-altitude winds were too strong for the delicate hairstyles of the guests. Perfect. Kaelen slipped outside. The cacophony of the party was instantly severed as the heavy door clicked shut behind him. The silence of the stratosphere took over, broken only by the whistling wind and the rustle of bioengineered leaves. The garden was hauntingly beautiful, filled with phosphorescent flowers that glowed in soft blues and purples. He moved silently, his worn-out boots making no sound on the velvet grass. He was heading toward the ventilation shafts when he froze. In the darkest corner of the garden, hidden beneath a weeping willow made of fiber optics, someone was there. Not a guard. Not a couple sneaking a kiss. It was a girl. She sat with her back to him, facing the endless abyss of the night sky. She wore a gown of pure white silk that pooled around her like spilled milk. Her hair was platinum, shimmering under the starlight. But what caught Kaelen's mechanic eyes wasn't her beauty. It was the machine she was sitting in. It wasn't a chair. It was a cage. A massive, floating contraption of chrome and leather, humming with a low, monotonous drone. It hovered a foot off the ground, bristling with sensors and robotic arms that encased her small body. A hover chair, Model X9000. Top of the line. Worth more than his entire neighborhood. And to Kaelen, it looked like the most soulless piece of engineering he had ever seen. He turned to leave, not wanting trouble. But then, a sound stopped him. A soft, choked sob. It was faint, swallowed by the wind, but Kaelen heard it. The girl was crying. He hesitated. The smart thing to do was walk away. He was a thief in a den of wolves. But Kaelen had a weakness. He couldn't walk away from things, or people, that were broken. He took a step forward. A twig snapped under his boot. Crack. The girl gasped. The massive chair spun around with a mechanical whir, moving so fast it looked violent. "Who's there?" Her voice rang out, sharp and imperious, though trembling with the remnants of tears. Kaelen raised his hands, stepping into the glow of the flowers. "Don't call the guards," he said quickly, his voice low and rough, contrasting with the polished surroundings. "I'm just a waiter. Got lost looking for the wine cellar. Didn't mean to disturb you, miss." The girl stared at him. Her eyes were violet, a deep, startling purple that reminded him of a nebula. They were red-rimmed and wet. She quickly wiped her face with the back of her hand, trying to assemble a mask of cold arrogance. What did you see?" she demanded, glancing down at her legs, which were hidden beneath the layers of silk, motionless and heavy. Kaelen lowered his hands, stuffing them into his pockets. He didn't look at her face. He looked at the chair. He walked a circle around it, his eyes narrowing in professional critique. "I saw," Kaelen said slowly, ignoring her shock, "a piece of garbage design." The girl blinked, stunned. "Excuse me, this chair," Kaelen pointed a greasy finger at the floating chassis. "The gyroscopic stabilizer is off by 0.5 degrees to the left. That's why it hums like a dying bee. And that lumbar support? It's rigid alloy. It must be digging into your spine. If you sit in this for more than 2 hours, your lower back must feel like it's on fire. Whoever built this clearly never sat in it." Silence stretched between them. Elara, the girl, stared at the stranger with wide eyes. For 10 years, people looked at her chair with pity, or awe, or fear. They called it a miracle of life support. No one, absolutely no one, had ever called it garbage. And no one had ever realized that her back hurt. "Who are you?" Elara asked, her voice losing its edge, replaced by curiosity. "A royal engineer? You don't Look like one. Kaelen let out a short, dry laugh. Royal engineers? Those guys only know how to read manuals. I'm Kaelen. I fix things people throw away. He reached into his vest and pulled out a handkerchief. It was frayed and had a small oil stain on the corner, but it was the cleanest thing he owned. He held it out. Here. Your mascara is running. Elara looked at the cheap fabric, then up at his amber eyes. They were direct, unashamed, and surprisingly warm. She hesitated, then reached out a pale, trembling hand to take it. Thank you, she whispered, dabbing her eyes. I am, Elara. I know, Kaelen lied. He had no idea who she was, but he guessed she was important. Why are you hiding out here? Party too loud? I hate it, Elara admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. She looked at the ballroom doors with disdain. In there, I'm not a person. I'm a broken doll in a glass case. They don't talk to me. They talk to my father about me. It's suffocating. Kaelen nodded. He leaned back against the stone railing, looking out at the clouds. I get that. Being trapped. You do? Elara scoffed softly. You have working legs. You can walk away. You can go anywhere. How could you understand? Kaelen looked down at his boots, worn thin, holding together with tape. Then he looked down into the black void beneath the clouds. Sometimes, he said quietly, chains aren't made of metal, Miss Elara. They're made of where you're born. You're stuck in that expensive chair. I'm stuck in the mud 10,000 meters down. We're both just waiting to rust. The wind picked up, blowing Elara's hair across her face. For a moment, the distance between them vanished. Just two lonely people on the edge of the world. Suddenly, the blare of sirens cut through the air. Searchlights swept across the garden walls. Security breach Sector 4. Intruder alert. Kaelen stiffened. His eyes darted to the door. Damn. They found me. He turned to Elara. I gotta go. Nice meeting you, Elara. He moved to jump over the railing, aiming for a drainpipe. Wait. Elara cried out, the chair whirring as she turned. You'll fall. That's suicide. Better than the detention cells, he gritted out. But he was too late. Heavy footsteps thundered on the stone path. Beam lights caught through the foliage. Guards were entering the garden. Kaelen was trapped. He pressed his back against the railing, looking for a way out, finding none. Then, he felt a small hand grab his wrist. Get down. Elara hissed. She yanked him toward her. Before he could process what was happening, she pressed a button on her chair. The machine lowered, and she spread the massive, voluminous skirt of her gown wide. Hide. Now. Kaelen dropped to his knees, crawling into the small, dark space beneath the hem of her dress and the chassis of the chair. The heavy silk settled over him, plunging him into darkness. He held his breath, curled up at the feet of the paralyzed princess. He could smell her perfume, jasmine and rain, overpowering the smell of his own fear. He felt the vibration of the chair's engine against his back. Lady Elara. A captain's voice boomed. Are you unharmed? We detected a heat signature here. Kaelen's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He froze, staring at the motionless, pale ankles of the girl right in front of his face. Above him, Elara took a steadying breath. When she spoke, her voice was ice cold, dripping with royal entitlement. Captain, she snapped. Do you make it a habit to blind me with flashlights? Or are you accusing me of hiding a platoon of rebels under my chair? No, no, my lady. The guard stammered. We just thought, I came here for silence, she cut him off. And you are ruining it. Leave. Or must I call my father? There was a pause. A tense, agonizing silence. Apologies, Lady Elara. We will search the east sector. Move out. The footsteps retreated. The door clicked shut. Under the dress, Kaelen exhaled, his forehead resting against the cold metal of her footrest. "They're gone." Elara's voice came down to him, soft and shaky now that the act was over. Kaelen lifted the silk and crawled out. He sat back on his heels, looking up at her. She was trembling, her hands gripping the armrest white-knuckled. "You," Kaelen grinned, a crooked, boyish grin. "You're crazy. You could have been arrested for aiding a criminal." "I'm not helping a criminal." Elara looked at him, her violet eyes intense. "I'm helping a mechanic." She paused, then looked away shyly. "And, you were right." "About what?" "The squeak. In the chair. It stopped." Kaelen chuckled. "Yeah. I tweaked the tension spring while I was down there. Should ride smoother now." He stood up, dusting off his knees. He looked at the massive, bulky machine that encasing her. "Elara," he said seriously. "This thing, it keeps you safe, but it keeps you a prisoner. It's too heavy." "It's all I have," she whispered. Kaelen reached out, hesitating for a second before taking her hand. He turned it over, placing a small, rough metal nut into her palm, a piece of junk he kept for luck. "Hold on to this. I didn't get the parts I needed tonight, but I got an idea." He walked to the edge of the balcony, balancing on the ledge. The abyss yawned below him. "I'm going to come back," he promised, looking back at her. "And when I do, I'm not just going to fix the squeak. I'm going to get you out of that cage." "How?" Elara asked, clutching the metal nut to her chest. Kaelen winked, his silhouette framed by the moonlight. "I'm going to build you wings." And with that, he tipped backward, plummeting into the clouds, leaving the princess of the sky alone with a piece of the earth in her hand. Chapter 2. The Secret Blueprint. The mire did not welcome Kaelen back with open arms. It welcomed him with the stench of sulfur and the distant scream of grinding metal. He landed hard in a pile of refuse foam at the bottom of Sector 4's waste chute, coughing as the dust cloud settled. His body ached from the fall, but his mind was on fire. He didn't walk back to his workshop. He ran. He burst through the rusted iron door of his home, kicking aside piles of copper wire and spent fuel cells. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He swept his workbench clear, sending tools clattering to the floor. He grabbed a piece of charcoal and began to draw on the wall. Not a chair. Not a support beam. His hand moved feverishly, sketching lines over the peeling paint. A joint here. A hydraulic piston there. A neural interface at the spine. "Legs," he muttered to the empty room, his eyes manic. "We don't need wheels. We need levers. We need motion." He worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and the memory of violet eyes filled with tears. By the time the artificial smog lights of the morning flickered on, the wall was covered in a blueprint that looked less like a machine and more like a skeleton made of lightning. The upper realm. 3 nights later, Elara sat in front of her vanity mirror. Her room was silent, save for the rhythmic humming of the air purifiers. She looked at the small, rough metal nut Kaelen had given her. She rolled it between her fingers, feeling the cold steel. It was ugly. It was dirty. And it was the most precious thing she owned. Suddenly, the mirror rippled. Elara gasped, wheeling her chair back. The reflection of her face distorted, pixelated, and then vanished. In its place, scrolling text appeared in green code on the glass surface. Greater than connection established. Channel, Ghost 4. Greater than audio only. "Hello?" Elara whispered, her heart pounding. Is someone there?" A burst of static, and then, a familiar, raspy voice filled her room. "Room service. Sorry about the delay, traffic was murder." "Kaelen." Elara breathed out, clutching the armrests of her chair. "How are you doing this? This is a secured royal line. Your royal line uses a frequency based on old encryption. Kaelen's voice sounded tired but amused. I patched into it using a microwave and a satellite dish I stole. Listen, Elara. I don't have much time. Did you get home safe? Yeah. Look, forget about me. We need to talk about the legs. Elara went still. The wings? You were serious? Dead serious. I've drawn the schematics. It's an exoskeleton. A frame that goes over your legs. It connects to the residual nerves in your spine. It bypasses the break in your cord and sends the signal straight to the motors. Elara looked down at her lap. Hope was a dangerous thing. It hurt more than despair. My father's doctors, the best scientists in the realm, they said it was impossible. They look at you and see a patient, Kaelen said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming fierce. I look at you and see a physics problem. And I solve problems. But Elara, I need measurements. And I need to test the neural link. I can't do that from down here. You want me to come to the Mire? The silence on the line was heavy. I know it's dangerous, Kaelen said softly. I know it's dirty. But if you want to walk, you have to take the first step. Elara looked at the golden cage of her room. She looked at the horizon where the sun was setting, far beyond her reach. Tell me where to go. The descent. It was madness. It was treason. Elara bribed a cargo pilot with a diamond earring to smuggle her onto a supply lift heading for the lower levels. She told her guards she was sleeping and locked her door. The descent took an hour. The elevator cage rattled and shook, plunging through the cloud layer. The air grew heavier, hotter, and smelled of rot. When the doors opened, Elara gagged. The Mire was a sensory assault. Neon signs flickered over puddles of oil. Steam hissed from broken pipes. People, thin, weary people, moved through the shadows like ghosts. She pulled the hood of her cloak tight, her X9000 chair hovering silently over the filth. She felt absurdly conspicuous, a pearl dropped in mud. Following the coordinates on her datapad, she navigated the maze of alleyways until she found the door marked with a spray-painted gear. She knocked. The door swung open instantly. Kaelen stood there. He was shirtless, covered in sweat and grease, wearing welding goggles around his neck. He looked wilder than before, thinner, but his eyes burned with an intensity that stopped her breath. He didn't bow. He didn't speak. He just stepped back and ushered her in. The workshop was a chaotic mess of scrap metal, wires, and tools. But in the center of the room, cleared of all debris, stood a metal frame. It was crude. It was unpolished silver and dark iron. It looked like the lower half of a knight's armor, stripped of its plating, revealing the hydraulic muscles underneath. Is that? Elara whispered. Prototype 1, Kaelen wiped his hands on a rag, walking toward her. It's ugly, I know. I had to melt down an old engine block to cast the thighs. It's beautiful, Elara said, her eyes tearing up. Let's see if it fits. He knelt beside her chair. I need to touch your legs, Elara. Is that okay? Elara nodded, her throat tight. Yes. Kaelen's hands were rough, callous, and warm. He gently lifted her feet from the footrests of her hoverchair. He unbuckled her silk shoes. He rolled up the hem of her expensive dress to her knees. His touch was professional, like a doctor, yet there was a reverence to it. He measured her calves with a caliper. He checked the flexibility of her ankles. Elara watched the top of his head, his dark hair messy and damp. She felt a strange heat rising in her cheeks. No one touched her like this. Not without gloves. Not without pity. Okay, Kaelen muttered, more to himself. Bone density is low, but the titanium bracing will support the weight. He stood up and dragged the heavy metal frame over. He opened the clamps. This part is going to be intimate, he said, not looking her in the eye. "I need to attach the neural nodes to your spine." Lower back. Elara leaned forward in her chair. Kaelen moved behind her. She felt his fingers brush the skin of her lower back as he moved her hair aside. She shivered. "Cold?" he asked. "No," she breathed. "Just waiting." He placed a small, cold metal disc against her spine. Then another. And another. "I'm going to activate the link," Kaelen said, moving back to a control panel made of salvaged circuit boards. "It might sting. Like a static shock." He flipped a switch. "Zap." "Ah!" Elara gasped, arching her back. It wasn't a sting. It was a jolt of white-hot lightning. It shot from her spine, down her hips, and into the darkness of her paralyzed legs. For a split second, she felt fire. "Elara?" Kaelen was at her side in an instant, his face pale. "Did it hurt? Should I stop?" Elara grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "Don't stop," she whispered, her voice trembling with shock and joy. "Kaelen, I felt that." "You felt the pain?" "I felt the heat," she said, tears spilling over. "For 10 years, it's been nothing but ice. I felt the heat in my toes." Kaelen stared at her, and then a slow, triumphant grin spread across his face. He looked at the ugly metal frame standing in the center of the room. "The connection works," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "The ghost is in the machine." He looked back at her, their faces inches apart in the dim light of the workshop. The smell of ozone and sweat hung in the air, charged with electricity that had nothing to do with the wires. "We can do this, Elara," he promised. "I can make you walk." "When?" she asked. "Soon. I need a week to calibrate the motors. Then, we fly." Suddenly, a loud banging echoed from the heavy iron door of the workshop. Boom. 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 "Open up. Sector Patrol," a harsh voice yelled from outside. We picked up an unauthorized energy spike. Kaelen's eyes went wide. He looked at Elara, then at the massive royal hover chair that screamed, "Upper class." "Hide," he hissed. "Behind the generator." Now, as the door hinges began to groan under the assault of a battering ram, Elara realized that the danger wasn't just falling, it was being caught before she ever learned to fly. Chapter 3: The First Flight. The week of waiting felt longer than the 10 years of paralysis. When Elara returned to the workshop, smuggled once again inside a cargo crate, the air felt different. It was charged. Heavy. Kaelen stood in the center of the room. He looked exhausted. Dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes, and his hands were wrapped in fresh bandages, but he was vibrating with energy. Behind him stood the finished exoskeleton. It was no longer a rough frame. Kaelen had polished the alloy until it shone like dark mercury. He had woven the hydraulic cables into elegant patterns that mimicked human muscle. It didn't look like a medical device. It looked like armor for a Valkyrie. "Ready?" Kaelen asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elara nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The process of strapping in was solemn, almost ritualistic. Kaelen knelt before her, securing the greaves around her shins, tightening the thigh braces. Click. Click. Snap. The sound of the buckles echoed in the silence. Finally, he moved behind her to attach the neural interface to her spine. "This is it," he murmured near her ear. "Deep breath." He activated the core. Hum. A low, resonant vibration traveled through Elara's body. It wasn't the sharp shock of the test run. It was a warm, flowing current, like liquid gold pouring into her veins. She gasped as sensation flooded the void where her legs used to be. She could feel the cold floor through the sensor pads in the metal soles. She could feel the weight of the air. "System green," Kaelen said, stepping back. He held out his hands. They were shaking slightly. "Stand up, Elara." Elara gripped his hands. She closed her eyes and pushed. She didn't engage a motor. She just willed herself to rise. And the machine obeyed. With a soft whine of servos, Elara Vance rose from her chair. Up, up, and up. She opened her eyes. The room spun for a second, then steadied. She was standing. She looked down at her feet, encased in steel, firmly planted on the concrete. Then she looked up. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at Kaelen's belt buckle or his chin. She was looking directly into his amber eyes. "You're tall," she whispered, a stunned laugh escaping her lips. "And you're shaking," Kaelen smiled, gripping her hands tighter to steady her. "Trust the metal. It won't let you fall." "I'm not shaking because of the metal," she breathed. "I'm shaking because I'm free." Kaelen's expression softened into something heartbreakingly tender. He didn't let go of her hands. Instead, he moved one of his hands to her waist, resting it on the cold alloy of the hip joint. "Music," he muttered. "We need music." He couldn't reach the radio without letting go, so he began to hum. It was a rough, low melody, a tune from the streets of the Mire. "One step," he coached. "Right foot." Elara focused. She swung her right leg forward. Clank. It hit the ground heavy, ungraceful. "Good," Kaelen encouraged. "Now the left." Clank. They moved slowly, awkwardly, turning in a small circle in the middle of the cluttered workshop. To an observer, it was a clumsy shuffle. To them, it was a waltz among the stars. "I'm walking," Elara sobbed, burying her face in his shoulder. The smell of grease and sweat was the sweetest perfume she had ever known. "Kaelen, I'm walking." "You're flying," he corrected, resting his chin on her head. "I told you I'd give you wings." They stopped moving, just holding each other, swaying slightly to the hum of the hydraulic engine. In that moment, the class divide, the poverty, the politics, it all vanished. There was just the boy who fixed things and the girl who was whole again. Kaelen pulled back slightly to look at her. His thumb brushed a tear from her cheek. He leaned in, and Elara closed her eyes, tilting her head up. Crash. The heavy iron door of the workshop didn't just open. It exploded inward. Smoke and blinding light flooded the room. Kaelen instinctively spun around, shielding Elara with his body, but the force of the blast knocked them both backward. Elara screamed as she hit the ground, the heavy exoskeleton weighing her down like an anchor. "Secure the target. Neutralize the hostile." Soldiers in white composite armor, Royal Guard, swarmed the room. "No. Don't touch him," Elara shrieked, trying to scramble up, but her neural sync was destabilized by the panic. Her legs wouldn't move. Two guards seized Kaelen, slamming him face first into the concrete. A heavy boot pressed onto his neck. "Kaelen." Then, the soldiers parted. A tall figure walked through the smoke, his cape billowing behind him. Governor Vance. He looked around the squalid workshop with a look of utter disgust. His gaze landed on Kaelen, bleeding on the floor, and then shifted to Elara, sprawled in the dirt, encased in the metal machinery. "Father," Elara gasped. "Please, it's not what you think." Vance didn't speak to her. He walked over to her, inspecting the exoskeleton with cold detachment. He tapped the beautiful titanium plating with his cane. "You allowed this filth to touch you?" Vance asked, his voice deadly quiet. "You allowed a rat to bolt scrap metal to your spine?" "It's not scrap," Elara yelled, a fire igniting in her chest. "It works. Look at me, Father. I was standing. I was dancing. You were playing pretend in a pile of garbage," Vance spat. He turned to his lieutenant. "Get her out of that contraption. Destroy it." "No," Elara screamed as the guards approached her with laser cutters. Kaelen struggled violently under the boot holding him down. "Don't you hurt her. You have to disconnect the neural link first. If you cut it, you'll fry her brain. Stop. Vance looked down at Kaelen. Silence him. A rifle butt cracked against Kaelen's jaw. Blood splattered across the floor. Kaelen. Elara sobbed. The guards grabbed Elara. They didn't listen to Kaelen's warning. They simply ripped the clamps open and tore the neural interface from her spine. Snap. A-A-A-H-H-H-H-H. Elara's scream was a sound of pure agony. It wasn't just physical pain. It was the sensation of her legs being amputated all over again. The light went out of her eyes, and she slumped forward, unconscious. The beautiful silver legs lay in a heap on the floor, lifeless. Elara, Kaelen groaned, spitting blood. He tried to crawl toward her, but he was hauled to his feet. Vance checked Elara's pulse. She was alive. He stood up, wiping his gloves as if he had touched something rotting. Take her to the shuttle, Vance ordered. Lock her in the isolation ward. She needs to be decontaminated. And the boy, sir? The lieutenant asked, gesturing to Kaelen, who was barely conscious, swaying in the grip of two soldiers. Vance looked at Kaelen. He looked at the genius work of the exoskeleton lying on the floor. He saw the threat. Not a threat of violence, but a threat of hope. He likes the bottom so much, Vance said icily. Let him see the very bottom. The wasteland, sir? Throw him off the edge. Kaelen didn't beg. He looked past the governor, his swollen eyes fixing on Elara's unconscious form being carried away. I'll come back, Kaelen rasped, blood bubbling on his lips. I'll come back for her. Vance didn't even blink. Goodbye, rat. They dragged Kaelen out of the workshop, to the edge of the service platform where the city ended and the sky began. The wind howled, smelling of ozone and death. Below lay the eternal cloud layer, covering the toxic ruin of the old world. The guard swung him once, twice, and let go. Kaelen fell. The lights of the city he tried to save, the city where he found love, shrank rapidly above him. He plummeted into the cold, dark mist, swallowed by the abyss. Above, in the shuttle, Elara lay dreaming of dancing, unaware that her partner was falling into hell. Chapter 4. The Fall. The upper realm, the glass prison. Elara woke to a world of blinding white. There was no smell of oil or ozone here. No warmth of a chaotic workshop. There was only the sterile, biting scent of antiseptic and the hum of high-grade air scrubbers. She was lying in a bed that felt like a cloud, in a room made of glass walls suspended high on the edge of the governor's spire. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. Kaelen? She rasped, her voice cracking. She tried to sit up, instinctively triggering the muscles in her legs to swing off the bed. Nothing happened. The phantom sensation of the exoskeleton, the ghost of the steel, was gone. Her legs were heavy, lifeless logs once more. The neural pathways Kaelen had awakened were silent, screaming into a void. Elara gasped, ripping the silk sheets off. Her legs were bare. Pale. Atrophied. No, she whimpered, clawing at her thighs, trying to find a spark, a twitch, anything. No, no, no. The door hissed open. Her father, Governor Vance, stood there. He looked pristine, not a hair out of place, as if he hadn't just ordered a boy to his death. You need rest, Elara, he said calmly. The trauma to your spine was severe. That device nearly fried your nervous system. You killed him, Elara whispered, staring at her hands. I removed a parasite, Vance corrected, walking to the window that overlooked the city. He was a thief using you for parts. A rat from the Mire. He's gone now. And you are safe. Safe? Elara laughed, a broken, jagged sound. She looked around the glass room. You didn't save me. You put me back in the box. Vance's jaw tightened. I did what was necessary for the future of Aethelgard. In time, you will understand. He turned and left, the door locking with a magnetic thud. Elara curled into a ball, shaking. She felt utterly alone. She reached into the pocket of her hospital gown, expecting nothing. But her fingers brushed against something hard and cold. The metal nut. They had taken her clothes, her dignity, and her legs. But somehow, they had missed the piece of junk Kaelen had given her. She pulled it out, clutching the rough, rusty steel so hard it cut into her palm. It was the only thing in this pristine room that was real. "You're not gone," she whispered to the metal, tears falling onto it. "You promised." The wasteland. Ground zero pain. It was the first thing Kaelen knew. It tasted like copper and ash. He gasped, his lungs filling with air that burned like acid. He rolled over and immediately retched, coughing up black bile. He was alive. Somehow. Kaelen blinked his eyes open. Above him, the sky was a churning ceiling of toxic gray smog. He couldn't see the floating city of Aethelgard anymore. The cloud layer hid it completely. He looked around. He was lying in a crater of soft, rotting organic matter, a massive fungal bloom that grew on the centuries of garbage dropped from the sky. The mushrooms were the size of houses, spongy and damp. They had broken his fall. Lucky, he wheezed, trying to sit up. A sharp agony stabbed his side. Ribs, broken. Definitely broken. He staggered to his feet, swaying. The landscape around him was a nightmare. This was the wasteland. The graveyard of the old world. Mountains of rusted metal twisted into skeletal shapes. Rivers of neon green sludge. And silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. He needed to move. The air down here wasn't breathable for long without filtration. Kaelen limped toward a pile of debris. His mechanic's eye took over, pushing the pain to the back of his mind. Need filter. Need carbon. He found the wreckage of an ancient ventilation unit. With trembling hands, he stripped out the charcoal filters. He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt, wrapped the charcoal inside, and tied it around his face. He took a breath. It still tasted metallic, but the burning in his lungs eased. "Okay," he muttered, his voice muffled. "Step 1, survive. Step 2, climb back up." He looked up at the gray ceiling. 10,000 meters. It was impossible. But Kaelen Vance didn't believe in impossible. He believed in leverage. He began to walk, scavenging as he went. He found a battery pack that still held a faint charge, a plasma cutter with a cracked handle, a datapad from the pre-ascension era. As he crested a hill of compressed trash, he saw it. In the distance, piercing through the smog and anchoring deep into the earth, was a colossal structure. A pillar of black metal, wide as a city block, stretching up into the clouds. The anchor. Legend said Aethelgard wasn't just floating, it was tethered. This was the ground station that beamed the anti-gravity waves upward to keep the city aloft. But something was wrong. Even from here, Kaelen could hear it. A low, grinding moan. Grrr, thud. Grrr, thud. It sounded like a heartbeat. A dying heartbeat. Kaelen limped toward it. As he got closer, the ground began to shake. Not a tremor, but a violent shudder that nearly knocked him off his feet. He reached the base of the massive tower. The metal was hot to the touch. He found an access panel, overgrown with mutated vines. He used the plasma cutter to slice through the lock. Inside, the control room was a tomb of dust and flashing red lights. Kaelen hooked the ancient datapad he found into the terminal. His fingers flew across the keys, bypassing centuries-old firewalls. "Come on, talk to me," he whispered. The screen flickered to life. A holographic schematic of the anchor appeared. Kaelen's blood ran cold. The main energy beam, the invisible pillar holding Aethelgard in the sky, was fluctuating wildly. The core down here was overheating. The stabilizers were shot. Greater than system failure imminent. Greater than structural integrity. 12%. Greater than time to collapse. 24 hours. No, Kaelen breathed. The tremors Elara had felt, the squeak in her chair, it wasn't just bad maintenance. The entire city was vibrating because the engine holding it up was tearing itself apart. Aethelgard wasn't just floating. It was falling. In 24 hours, the gravity beam would snap. The entire city, the palaces, the slums, the people who threw him away, and Elara, would plummet 10,000 meters and smash into the crust of the earth. Kaelen looked at the readout. He looked at his broken tools. He looked at his bruised, bleeding hands. He was the only person on the planet who knew the sky was falling, and he was stuck at the bottom of the world. "Think, Kaelen, think," he yelled, pacing the room. He couldn't fix the anchor from down here. The controls were locked out by the mainframe up in the city. He had to get up there. He had to manually reset the core from the top. He needed to fly. He ran back outside, scanning the mountains of trash with new eyes. He didn't see garbage anymore. He saw a fuel tank from an old shuttle. He saw turbine blades from a crashed drone. He saw sheets of corrugated titanium. He didn't have a spaceship, but he had the biggest junkyard in history. Kaelen grabbed his plasma cutter and ignited the blade. The blue flame reflected in his fierce, determined eyes. "Hold on, Elara," he growled at the clouds above. "I'm coming." Chapter 5. The Ascent. The Upper Realm. 12 hours to impact. The crystal wine glass on Elara's bedside table slid 3 inches to the left. It didn't tip over. It just slid, as if the room itself was on a slope. Elara stared at it. She placed a marble from a decorative bowl onto the floor. It rolled immediately toward the window, gathering speed until it hit the glass wall with a sharp clack. "We're tilting," she whispered. The tremors were constant now. Not the gentle swaying of a floating city, but a deep, grinding vibration that rattled her teeth. Outside, the perfect blue sky was marred by plumes of smoke rising from the lower sectors. The door opened. Governor Vance strode in, looking harried. His uniform was unbuttoned at the collar, a rare sign of stress. "Father." Elara dragged herself upright in the bed. "The city is listing. The gravity stabilizers are failing." Vance didn't look at her. He went straight to the secure terminal on the wall. "It is merely atmospheric turbulence, Elara. A thermal pocket. Go back to sleep." "Don't lie to me," Elara screamed, the force of her voice stopping him. "I know the schematics of the anchor. I saw Kaelen's data. The core isn't just fluctuating. It's dying. If you don't evacuate the lower levels, millions will die when we crash." Vance turned slowly. His eyes were hard. "That mechanic poisoned your mind. There will be no crash. Aethelgard is eternal. I have my best engineers on it." "Your engineers are yes men," Elara cried, tears of frustration hot on her face. "They won't tell you the truth until the ground is rushing up to meet us. Please, Father. Sound the evacuation alarm." Vance walked to the door. "You are hysterical. I'm increasing your sedation dosage." "Father, look at the horizon." She pointed to the window. The cloud line wasn't straight anymore. It was diagonal. "Sleep, Elara." The door locked. The vents hissed, pumping a sleep gas into the room. Elara grabbed a wet towel from her wash basin and pressed it to her face. She crawled to the window, dragging her useless legs, and pressed her hand against the cold glass. "Kaelen," she sobbed into the towel. "You were the only one who could fix things. Where are you?" "The wasteland. The launch site. Don't blow up. Please don't blow up." Kaelen tightened the last bolt on the fuel line with a grunt. He stepped back to admire his creation. It was, without a doubt, the ugliest flying machine ever constructed. The fuselage was the rusted hull of an ancient submarine he dug out of the muck. The wings were mismatched sheets of corrugated titanium, welded at aggressive angles. The engine, the heart of the beast, was a volatile cluster of hydrogen tanks and a repurposed thruster from a crashed mining drone. He painted a name on the side in black grease. The Brick. It looked like a coffin with rockets. "All right, Brick," Kaelen patted the metal flank. "You don't need to be pretty. You just need to be fast." The ground beneath him shook violently. A massive chunk of debris, a piece of a building from the city above, crashed into the wasteland a mile away, sending up a mushroom cloud of dust. The Aethelgard was falling apart. Kaelen climbed into the cockpit. There was no seatbelt. He strapped himself in with duct tape and old cargo netting. The dashboard was a mess of analog dials and exposed wires. He flipped the ignition switch. Thunk. Sputter. "Come on," he pleaded, sweat stinging his eyes. "Wake up." He punched the dashboard. ROAAAAR. The engine ignited with a sound like a dragon waking up. Blue flame erupted from the rear, scorching the fungal ground to ash. The entire ship vibrated so hard Kaelen's teeth chattered. He grabbed the control stick, a literal metal pipe welded to the steering column. "Hang on, Elara," he gritted out. He slammed the throttle forward. Boom. The brick didn't glide. It launched. It shot forward, tearing through the mounds of trash, and then angled sharply upward. The G-force hit Kaelen like a physical punch, pinning him to the seat. His vision blurred at the edges. He was flying. He rocketed straight up, piercing the gray smog layer. The altimeter spun wildly. 1,000 meters. 3,000 meters. Heat levels rising. Kaelen yelled over the roar of the engine. The metal hull was groaning. Then, he hit the storm belt. The natural barrier between the ground and the sky was a chaotic layer of lightning and hurricane-force winds. Crack boom. A bolt of lightning struck the left wing. The ship rolled violently. Kaelen wrestled the stick, screaming as the metal burned his hands. Stabilize. Stabilize. Wind tore at the welded seams. A piece of the outer shell ripped off. Sparks showered inside the cockpit. "I am not dying here," Kaelen roared, his amber eyes burning brighter than the warning lights. "I am not letting her fall." He pushed the engine past the red line. He dumped the auxiliary fuel into the main burner. The ship screamed. Speed increased. 5,000 meters. 8,000 meters. The darkness of the storm clouds grew thicker, suffocating. Then, suddenly, whoosh, silence. The brick burst through the top of the cloud layer. Sunlight flooded the cockpit. Kaelen gasped, wiping blood from his nose. Below him was a sea of white clouds. Above him was Aethelgard. But it wasn't the jewel he remembered. The city was tilted at a terrifying 15-degree angle. Smoke poured from the hanging gardens. One of the stabilization spires had snapped off. It looked like a sinking ship in an ocean of sky. And at the very top, the governor's spire was leaning precariously over the abyss. "I see you," Kaelen whispered. He angled the smoking, battered ship toward the city. The Royal Defense Grid came online. Red laser sights painted the hull of the brick. Yeah, I know I'm unauthorized," Kaelen muttered, his hands flying across the controls. "Try to catch me." He didn't aim for a landing pad. He aimed for the only place that mattered. The energy tower. The heart of the anchor system. And right next to it, the glass room where a girl was watching the world end. The governor's spire. Elara saw it. Through the haze of the sleep gas, she saw a black speck shooting out of the clouds. It wasn't a sleek royal shuttle. It was a jagged, smoking comet leaving a trail of black exhaust. It banked hard, dodging automated turret fire with a reckless grace that could only belong to one pilot. "Kaelen," She breathed against the glass. The ship roared past her window, so close she could see the welder's marks on the hull. She saw the cockpit. She saw him. He was bloodied. His clothes were rags. But he turned his head and looked right at her. He didn't wave. He pointed down. Toward the base of the tower. Toward the core. "I'm going to fix it." Elara understood. He wasn't here to rescue her and run away. He was here to save everyone. The ship pulled up, its engines sputtering, and crash-landed onto the maintenance deck of the energy tower with a screech of tearing metal. Crash. Fire erupted. Elara pressed her hand to the glass. "Get up. Please, get up." For a moment, there was no movement from the wreckage. Then, the canopy blew off. Kaelen crawled out. He stumbled, fell, and got back up. He was limping, holding his side, but he was moving toward the access hatch of the core. Elara turned back to her room. The gas was making her dizzy, but her mind was sharp. "You need help," she whispered. "You can't do it alone." She looked at the door. Locked. She looked at the computer terminal. Locked. She looked at the ventilation grate near the floor. She remembered crawling through the dirt in the garden. She remembered the pain of the exoskeleton. "I don't need legs to fight," she snarled. Elara dragged herself off the bed. She grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the shelf and smashed it against the vent cover until it buckled. She squeezed her body into the dark, dusty shaft. It was tight, claustrophobic, and smelled of grease. It smelled like freedom. She began to crawl, pulling her dead weight inch by inch, heading toward the core to save the boy who fell from the sky. Chapter 6. Wings of Eternity. The core chamber, the heat inside the energy tower, was enough to melt lead. Kaelen stripped off his ruined jacket. His torso was wrapped in bandages that were rapidly turning red, but he didn't stop. He jammed a massive iron crowbar into the gears of the central gyroscope. Grind. Screech. The anchor shaft, a pillar of titanium 10 meters wide, was wobbling like a spinning top, losing momentum. "Align, damn you!" Kaelen roared, putting his entire body weight on the crowbar. He was trying to manually force 100 tons of machinery back into center. It was suicide. The gears shredded the metal bar, sending shrapnel flying. One shard sliced Kaelen's cheek, but he didn't blink. "Step away from the console, mechanic." Kaelen froze. He turned his head. Governor Vance stood on the catwalk above. He held a high-powered energy pistol, aimed steadily at Kaelen's heart. "You," Kaelen panted, blood dripping from his chin. "You're going to let the city fall?" "I am saving what matters," Vance said, his voice echoing over the roar of the dying engine. He walked to a manual override lever painted in yellow and black hazard stripes. "Severance protocol. If I cut the tether to the lower levels," Vance shouted, "the Mire drops. The weight reduction will let the palace stabilize. It is a necessary amputation." "Those are people," Kaelen screamed. "My family." "Your people. They are rust." Vance's hand hovered over the lever. "And rust spreads." "No." A ventilation grate in the ceiling exploded downward. Elara didn't drop gracefully. She fell like a stone, hitting the metal grating of the catwalk with a sickening thud right behind her father. Vance spun around, shocked. "Elara?" She didn't speak. She didn't look like a princess. Her gown was torn to shreds, her face smeared with grease, her hands bloody from dragging her body through the shafts. She lunged. She grabbed her father's ankle. She didn't have the strength to stand, but she had the strength to hold on. She yanked him off balance. "Let go!" Vance shouted, stumbling. The gun skittered across the floor. "You want to cut the weight?" Elara screamed, staring up at him with fierce, violet eyes. "Then you have to cut me loose too." "Because I am not letting go." Vance kicked at her, panic in his eyes. "Elara, you fool. We are running out of time. Kaelen, Elara yelled, turning her head toward the engine pit. Do it. Fix it now. Kaelen looked at her, his broken princess fighting a king on her knees. A surge of adrenaline, hotter than the core itself, flooded his veins. He turned back to the gears. He didn't use the crowbar this time. He plunged his hands directly into the control couplings. The heat seared his palms. Come on. He pulled the synchronization lever with a primal scream. Clunk. The massive gear slid into place. WHIRRRRR. The grinding noise stopped. The violent shaking turned into a steady, rhythmic thrum. The gyroscope spun up, humming in perfect harmony. The room bathed in a soft, stable blue light. Greater than system stabilized. Anchor integrity, 100%. On the catwalk, Van slumped against the railing, defeated. He looked at the stable readings, then down at his daughter, who was still gripping his leg, trembling with exhaustion. He looked at Kaelen, who was slumped over the console, gasping for air, his burned hands shaking. The city wasn't falling. The mire wasn't cut. A boy with nothing but trash had saved them all. Vance dropped to his knees. For the first time, he didn't look at Elara with pity. He looked at her with awe. You, Vance whispered. You are stronger than I ever was. Kaelen limped up the stairs. He ignored the governor. He went straight to Elara. He knelt in the dirt and oil, scooping her up into his arms. We did it, he whispered into her hair. We held the sky. Elara buried her face in his neck, sobbing. You came back. Always, he kissed her forehead. Always. 6 months later, the Cathedral of Starlight. The doors of the great cathedral stood open. Inside, the pews were packed. But there were no VIP sections today. A duchess sat next to a welder from Sector 4. A cyborg street vendor sat next to a royal admiral. The class barrier hadn't just fallen. It had been dismantled, piece by piece. At the altar, Kaelen waited. He wore a white suit, though he still had grease under his fingernails. Some things never changed. Grok, the massive thug from the Mire, stood aside him as the best man, awkwardly trying not to crush the ring box. Breathe, kid, Grok whispered. You look like you're gonna faint. I might, Kaelen admitted. Then, the music started. It wasn't an organ. It was a synthesized melody, a mix of classical strings and the deep, resonant bass of the underground. The crowd stood. And Elara Vance appeared. A collective gasp swept through the hall. She wasn't in a wheelchair. She wasn't being carried. She was walking. She wore a dress of stardust silk that split at the thigh to reveal the masterpiece beneath. Project Seraphim. Her new legs were a work of art. Polished silver alloy woven with veins of glowing blue light. They moved with silent, fluid grace, powered by a nanocarbon core. They didn't look like machinery. They looked like jewelry forged by the gods. Elara walked down the aisle. Her steps were steady. Her head was high. She looked at no one but Kaelen. Halfway down the aisle, her father, ex-Governor Vance, now retired and in a wheelchair himself, reached out a hand. Elara stopped. She kissed her father's cheek, whispering forgiveness, and then continued her walk alone. She didn't need to be given away. She belonged to herself. She reached the altar. She took Kaelen's hands. You cleaned up nice, she teased, though her eyes were shimmering. You look, Kaelen's voice failed him. You look like you can fly. Only with you, she replied. The vows were spoken. The rings were exchanged. You may kiss the bride. Kaelen leaned in. As their lips met, the crowd erupted in cheers. Rose petals and metal confetti rained down. But the kiss didn't end. Kaelen winked at her. Ready to leave? Hit it, Elara grinned. Kaelen pressed a remote in his pocket. Whoosh! From the calves of Elara's seraphim legs, translucent energy wings unfolded. shimmering like dragonflies. Small thrusters concealed in Kaelen's boots ignited. To the shock and delight of the city, the bride and groom didn't walk back down the aisle. They lifted off. Hand in hand, they hovered upward, spinning in a slow, gravity-defying waltz toward the open skylight of the cathedral. They burst out into the open air, soaring above the city of Aethelgard, a city no longer divided by clouds, but united by the ground and the sky. Kaelen and Elara flew into the sunset, leaving the rust behind, carried forever by wings of their own making. The end.